Sometimes they have. Yeah. All right, here we go.
Says Nick is recording.
Okay, good morning, Chris LaBarbera.
Good morning.
Chris has a marvelous background in trumpet and trumpet education and performance, recording, you name it. And we're going to spend some time talking about some of his experiences in the business. And some of you might have seen a wonderful clip that was recently making the rounds on Facebook of Chris playing Harry James's trumpet concerto. So, Chris, good morning. Tell us a little bit about where all of your music career and trumpet career started.
Well, I was born up north, and we moved to Florida in 71 when I think I was like 7 years old. And, Florida has very hot summers. The summers get really hot here. So when I hit junior high school, in the 6th grade, I didn't want to go outside for gym. I didn't want to be at gym. And in those days, you could skip gym and you could take band. Now, so my mother signed me up for the band. And I really had no interest in it. I just was looking to get out of gym. That's all. I just didn't want to be out in the sun in Florida. Even though school lets out for a couple of months in the summer, it still gets really hot.
Sure.
And I wanted to be in the air conditioning.
Right.
So she signed me up for band, and when the band director demonstrates all the instruments, back in those days, band directors could play a little bit of flute, a little bit of trumpet. They could play scales and stuff on each thing, maybe. And when I saw the instruments, I said, you know what I want? I want the piccolo. Why? I could put it in my pocket, leave it in my locker. This is no trouble at all, I mean, I was a lazy kid when it came to school. So anyway, my mother got me a flute. We couldn't get a piccolo, so I had a flute, and I'm home trying to play that thing, blowing. I'm getting dizzy. I can't get a sound out of it. The kid next door, who's a couple of years older than me, he came over. He has a trumpet with him. I took the trumpet. I made a noise on it right away. My mother said, maybe I should get you one of those. I said, yeah, get me one of those. And that's how it started. In the beginning, I wasn't really even that interested in it. I just was doing it to get out of gym. But after about a year, I started to really like it, take an interest in it. I started to get pretty good at it. And, I just I just started to enjoy it more and more. And then after a couple of years, I was real serious. By the time I was 13, I was in it for the long haul.
When you say long haul, were you thinking about becoming a professional player?
Yeah, it was.
Right then and there, huh?
Even at 13, that's what I wanted to do. Here's the thing. See, I played guitar when I was young. That was my first instrument, and I wasn't very good at it. And I tried to take guitar lessons, and I didn't have the discipline, to practice right. But with this, it was different. With the trumpet, it kind of came to me a lot easier than the guitar, So, you like something that you're good at, and I started to get good at it. And, when you're 13 years old and you're around a bunch of kids your own age and you're good at something, when you're not good at sports, which I really wasn't, I wasn't, academically a good student. I was a bad kid. I mean, Jesus, listen, I basically got asked to leave school at 15 years old. I mean, sir, that's how bad I was. I was a bad kid, man. I left school at 15, took a GED, never went back, never went to college, nothing. Essentially, I was in the 10th grade.
Were you taking private lessons at that time, or just?
Yeah, I was taking lessons. I was taking lessons with a guy who played on the Kenton band. He played fourth trumpet on the Kenton band. He's on a couple of those. He's on the Cuban Fire album. His name is Phil Gilbert. And then from Phil, I met Vinny Tano. And Vinny was my hero. I mean, Vinny, till this day, I tell people, Vinny is the greatest trumpet player nobody's heard. I mean, this guy, he could do anything. He was just such a great trumpet player, amazing jazz player. I mean, guys in the business know him, but I'm just saying, he's on a lot of those KC and the Sunshine Band records from the 70s. All those were recorded at Criteria in North Miami. I was in that studio a million times when I got older, but that's when they were all done. Him and Kenny Falk. Kenny helped me later on in my career. Kenny helped me a lot. I'll talk about that, when we get to it. But Vinny I met when I was like 13, 14. And I was just mesmerized by this guy, the things he could do on the horn. And he liked me. I mean, these older guys liked me. All my life, I was very lucky. First of all, you got to understand, South Florida was a place. I lived in Hollywood. Hollywood was right between Miami and Fort Lauderdale. I was 20 minutes from downtown Miami, and I was 15 minutes from Fort Lauderdale. You know who lived around there? I got to know Billy Butterfield. Billy Butterfield was a dear friend of mine. I knew Billy good. My mother would take me to the Travelers Lounge where Billy was playing in Miami. My mother and father dropped me off, leave me with Billy, and I'd sit at a table all by myself. When Billy would take his breaks, he'd come over and sit with me.
Wow.
Billy Butterfield stories. Vinny, there's a CD I found a few nights ago. I was poking around the internet and I saw a thing. It said Chubby Jackson and his all-star band live 1978. I was there in that crowd. I had no idea the CD was around. I had my daughter order it for me a few days ago. Vinny took me in his car down to this place, the Swiss Chalet, where they were having this big concert. I'll tell you who was in the band. You ready? Frank Rosalino, Nat Adderley, Alan Eager, Arnett Cobb, Danny Turner, Pete Minger, Duffy Jackson, Chubby Jackson. It was an all-star big band they put together. And somebody recorded it and apparently put it out on CD. But I was there with Vinny that night, and I was 15 years old. I just turned 15, and I'm in this club, and Vinny left me with some people to sit with, older musicians that were there that night just to hear the band. So I mean, I was in a good place. South Florida was a great place. People don't know Al Porcino lived down here. Al Porcino came here in the early 70s. He lived here. He had a boat. He liked to go boating. He lived in Hollywood. Vinny Tano lived here. Billy Butterfield lived here. Red Solomon from the old Jackie Gleason show in the radio days in New York. I ran into Red Solomon down here. Great trumpet player, man. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Stubby Pastor, Tony Pastor's brother, was down here. The trumpet player. Who else? I mean, just Don Goldie. I knew Don Goldie very well. I worked with Don. I played a lot of gigs with Don. Don used to have these get these jobs where they were half Cuban and half American. And I knew a lot of Cuban tunes. I played with a lot of these little conjuntos where they don't use music. You have to learn the tunes. And I would, I was a quick study with learning tunes. So I knew a lot of old Cuban. Don would call me for these Cuban American jobs, and I got to know Don. I mean, there was just so many trumpet players that moved to Florida, and Mel Davis. I knew Mel Davis real good. I was in Mel Davis's house 3 or 4 times. I mean, I was playing a job for some jazz society, and this big guy comes up to me and he says, "How you doing? You sound good." I says, "Thank you very much." He says, "I'm Mel Davis. Do you know me?" I says, "Absolutely, I know you."
Wow.
As we talk, I'll remember more guys, but there was so many guys down there.
Do you, at what point did you actually start gigging professionally?
Well, here's the
How
thing.
old were you?
I started sitting in. There was a lot of places to play down here. When I was 14 years old, I lived walking distance from this American Legion Hall. It was post 92. It's still there. It's in Hollywood on Dixie Highway. Every Sunday, they had a little jam session. They had an accordion player, good accordion player, and a drummer, and then all the horn players would come in and sit in. And at 14, I knew 3 tunes. I knew Satin Doll, Perdido, and I Can't Get Started. I knew those 3 tunes. And I go in there at 14 and I'd sit in with these guys. And these guys were all in their 50s, And so I was always around older musicians, I started working right around Well, I worked New Year's Eve, 1980. That much I remember. I still have the picture of me in a tuxedo on New Year's Eve, 1980. But I mean, I started sitting in way before I started playing for money. I would go when I got my driver's license in Florida. You got your learner's permit at 15, 16. You got your regular license. You could drive all by yourself. When I started driving by myself, I would go out every night of the week, every single night, and sit in somewhere. I'd usually go to Fort Lauderdale or I'd go to North Miami, where all the hotels were. And in the lounges, they always had piano players. I just walk in with my horn. I'd say, "How you doing? Can I play a couple of tunes?" They'd say, "Sure." So things were back then. You know,
Wow.
guys don't have that today.
No,
The
that's a
guys,
good point.
yeah, they just don't have it. It's not around. You remember that. I know you remember those days, but
Sure.
guys don't have it. And it breaks my heart because I get these guys, they want to take lessons and they say to me, "Hey, Chris, how can I learn tunes? How can I learn to play, And I say, "Isn't there any place you can go sit in? You got to get out and play. You got to go sit in. You can't just stay in your room and play with aerosols. You got to get out and play with people, you know." And there's no place for them to play, and it just breaks my heart. It makes me so sad because I
I,
see these young guys. They're so enthusiastic, they want to play, and there's nowhere for them to play.
it's very interesting. I think coming from, a similar kind of environment, there was a special interest on the part of these older, really, really fine players. Most, I mean, there were exceptions. They were always willing to take a young kid,
Oh
hey
yeah,
man, let me hear you play, give you pointers, whatever. I
yep.
mean, I remember Jay Florado and I, uh, we met Maynard when we were about 11 or 12 years old. Okay. And it was a club in Westbury, Long Island called the Cork and Bib.
I know
And,
the cork and bib. I know about the cork and bib. Sure,
right.
guys.
Okay. And they used to get Namax, Miles Davis, Cannonball Adderley, Maynard Ferguson, whatever. And they'd come in and do 3 nights, 4 nights, whatever it is. And we would go with Jay's father to hear Maynard. And all of those guys in the 60 and 61 band, 62 band, we all knew them in kind of a very friendly way, you know. All of them, Rufus Jones, Chet Ferretti, Pavone, that Pavone, and
Yep.
of course Maynard. But you're right. I think that scene has changed. Some of it, there really wasn't like the jazz education in the schools, like in the colleges and the high schools, like now. But none of the places where to go and sit in, or like the Italian kids would go play in the Italian feast band,
Sure,
uh,
sure.
which was always something. So you actually were gigging as a teenager
Oh
in
yeah.
South Florida.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Now look, not for I don't want it to sound like I was playing big jobs. I was
Right.
working little dumps, little dumpy nightclubs, little bars. I was making $50, $60. I wasn't playing any major thing when I was 16, 17. But as I got older, the jobs got better, the money got better. By the time I was in my 20s, I was doing some pretty good work. But when I was in my teens, I worked at I'll give you some of the funny names. I worked in a place called the Nightcap Lounge. It's still there in North Miami. It's a little
Wow.
old bar. I worked in I eventually started working in that Post 92. They started paying me a little money. I mean, not
Wow.
much. And then there
Yeah.
was a club in Hollywood, a famous club called Hemingway's, and I started working in Hemingway's with a nice piano player, a guy who passed away, wonderful piano player named Ernie Goldsmith, black guy, fantastic, played like Errol Garner, man,
Wow.
wonderful player. And from all these guys, I learned their tunes. You're working with a guy, you got to learn the tunes he wants to play. And back in the days of the girl singers, you had to play in the girl singers keys.
That's
You
right.
learn a lot playing in those little clubs, in those little joints.
How'd you get into the Latin thing?
Uh, what happened was there was a Well, there was a lot of Latin bands in Miami in the 80s. I mean, Jesus, in the early 80s, in the mid 80s, there were Latin bands all over the place. But those weren't the kind of Latin bands I played in. I didn't play in the kind where they had charts. I played in these little Cuban conjuntos, they call them. They have a flute, a trumpet. Um, uh, 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 they have the congas. Sometimes they have accordion or piano, and they have, sometimes they use a regular drummer, sometimes they use a regular Latin rhythm section with the timbales and all that. And I played all these old Cuban tunes from the 50s. Benny Moré, this band called Aragon that was real popular in Cuba in the 50s. All these tunes, El Bodeguero, Son de la Loma, stuff like that. Tunes that were popular in Cuba before the revolution, because that's what was in Miami at the time. All these Cubans that remembered Cuba in the 50s, and they went to a party, they wanted to hear this stuff. The bride's family is all from Cuba, or the groom's family is all from Cuba, and you start playing this stuff and they all get on the dance floor.
So you must have built your chops up pretty well doing all that work.
Did a lot of Cuban Jewish work. Those were tough. You play all the Jewish horrors, all the klezmer stuff, then you turn around, you play all this Cuban stuff.
Cuban Jewish music. Now that's a new one on me. Fill me in on that.
Miami back then, they had a big population of Cuban Jews. They were I guess they were Ashkenazi that moved to Cuba sometime, maybe, when they saw things were getting bad in Europe, they fled to Cuba. And they liked that music. They liked that Cuban music. They came to like it, and they loved it. And you play a horror, good luck horror, and then you go right into a Cuban tune, And at the end of every one of those jobs, you had to play these things. They call them the congas. They're little melodies. There's about 12 or 13 of them. And they dance around the room, and they have all these things they hold up, these poles and stuff with flags on them, and dancing around the room. Every job ended the same way. They were all hard, but they were good. They were good for your chops.
Let me ask you this: with all of this activity and musicians coming in, you mentioned Al Pacino and what have you. Do you ever think about going out on the road, or do you ever have an opportunity to go out on the road?
I had plenty of opportunities, but me being the guy I am, I didn't want to leave my house. I didn't want to leave my bed. I didn't want to leave my refrigerator. No, I had plenty of chances to go out on the road. I'm just not a person that likes to travel all that much. I mean, if I had a job that was an hour away in a car, I'd take the job, I'd write it down, and then I'd have anxiety over, man, I got to drive an hour to this job. Geez, I could have taken something right around the corner,
When did you start actually recording? Like doing like studio work?
There were always record dates in Miami. I don't know if people realize just how many. There were tons of big Latin recording sessions in Miami in the 80s and the 90s. I don't know if it's still going on. I've been out of that world for a while. But I would say I started recording around like 1989, 1990, maybe was the first time I ever went in a recording session. See, that's how you know if you got good pitch, man. When you're in a recording session, if you have any discrepancies with your pitch, you hear it right away. As soon as they play something, you're like, ouch, ooh, I'll fix that. Sorry,
Wow. So there was a lot of commercial work there at that time.
Yeah, that too. Listen, there were nightclubs that with this was the disco era too. The early 80s was the disco.
Yeah.
There were 4 or 5 clubs in Fort Lauderdale that had 10-piece bands working 5-6 nights a week.
Wow.
I'll tell you who played in one of those bands for years. Dennis Noday.
Sure.
Dennis lived next door to me. You know that, right? He was my neighbor. First guy to move into that place was Roger Homefield. Roger was the lead trombone player with Buddy Rich. He did 3 or 4 tours with Buddy in the 80s. He was on Maynard's band in the late 70s. He was on the Kenton band in the mid 70s. He was a phenomenal lead trombone player, this guy. The best in the business back then, the best. And
No.
and he moved in right next door to me. And my grandfather, who was, he had to know everybody's business on the street. So as soon as somebody moved on that block, man, my grandfather would, wander over. And with the first 10 minutes, he'd find out what the guy did for a living, how much he made a week, old, whatever. So my grandfather comes over to me one day. My grandparents lived 2 doors down. And he says, there's a guy. He says he played with that great drummer. What's his name? I said, Buddy Rich? Yeah, that's the guy. I says, really? He says, yeah. He says he's a trombone player. I says, no, that can't be. I went over there. Sure enough, I met Roger Homefield, and he's the guy who booked my first lesson with Reinhardt. He was a Reinhardt guy. He was a major Reinhardt guy. And
okay, yeah.
After I got to know him a little bit, he said to me, he went to my parents. I was only 15. He went to my parents and he said, Chris has potential. And he says, there's this teacher in Philadelphia that I studied with. He said, and he's kind of old. He says, and Chris should see him before, he's too old to teach anymore, this guy. He's getting old. He's getting up there. And my parents said, fine. And I saw Reinhardt from Florida. And I saw him on and off for 8 years.
Well, let me ask you a question. So you went up to Philly to study with him?
Yeah, well, I had family all over the Northeast. I had family in Connecticut. I had family in New York. I had family in Jersey. So I used to usually take the train from Carmel into Philly.
What was your first lesson with Reinhardt like? Just out of curiosity, what was your impression?
I was very confused, to be honest with you. That's why I tell people when I give them that first lesson. First of all, I take my time. I go very slow, and I demonstrate every exercise, myself, so they can hear.
Yeah.
But Reinhardt the man was a genius. I owe a lot of my career to him. But he also he liked to hear himself talk,
Okay.
And he was very, very technical. And I try to break the things down so people can understand the basic concepts, because the basic concept is very sound. And the other thing is, he had a tendency of saying the same thing several different ways. You know what I mean? So I kind of cut through all the BS. It's not BS. It's good what he did. He just wanted to make sure you didn't confuse anything or misinterpret anything. So he would tell you over and over several different ways, So, but the first lesson, it was very, very intimidating. I left there looking at the papers and saying, I was on a train and I was looking at them and I was saying to myself, how am I going to make heads or tails of this? I don't know what to do with this stuff. But you know what? After a few weeks, I figured it all out. It was fine.
No kidding. Wow. Did just out of curiosity, did he make any corrections on maybe your approach or your placement or anything like that?
Yeah, he never changed anybody's embouchure. He said to me, he said, people think I change embouchures. He says they think I'm guilty of that. He said, but I never changed anybody's embouchure. He said, I don't give you a new dike. I plug holes in the old one. Those were his exact words to me.
Wow.
Yeah. He changed a couple. Well, I wasn't taking my breaths correctly. I was taking the breath, then placing the mouthpiece, then playing. You have to take the breath with the mouthpiece on your chops through the mouth corners, And that was my big thing I was doing wrong. And that took me a while to straighten that out, But I did.
Well, you know what? You see that because I teach a lot of young kids, and you see that, and it's a function here where, the teacher's got a 20-minute lesson with a bunch of trumpet kids, 4th grade, 5th grade, whatever, and they really don't have the time. So you get a kid that's, whatever, all kinds of different, until that child goes to, maybe he shows a little potential, and the parent says, well, maybe, you should get some private lessons or whatever, I know you mentioned Roy Eldridge before.
Yeah.
How did you meet Roy Eldridge? Tell me a little bit
Well,
about that.
give me one second. I got some allergies. I just got to blow my nose.
Of course.
Sorry for the folks
I
that
think that was an A flat.
yeah, maybe it was. That's funny. Yeah, well, first of all, let me tell you another thing about South Florida. It was just the best place you could grow up. I mean, outside of Manhattan, okay, South Florida was like just it was, people don't realize that weren't here. It was just a swinging place. There was stuff going on every day, every night, all the time. And there were 3 or 4 jazz clubs. I mean, big jazz clubs here. There was the Take Five Lounge. There was the Travelers Lounge. There was the uh, I can't remember the name of it. It was in a hotel near the airport. A lot of them were down near the Miami airport on Lejeune over that way. And that, people from the area will know what I'm talking about. And then there was a big one up in Fort Lauderdale called Bubba's. Huge, huge jazz club. And I saw, these are the guys I saw. I'll get to Roy, but I just want you to know the guys I saw down here as a kid, okay? I saw Dizzy Gillespie a few times. I saw Roy Eldridge. I saw Blue Mitchell. I saw Thad Jones. I saw Sweets Edison. That's trumpet players. And then, of course, Billy Butterfield lived here. I saw him all the time. Don Goldie lived here. I saw him all the time. Vinnie Tanner was my teacher, and I like to talk about Vinnie a little later, too. But, I mean, that's just for starters, the guys I saw. And saxophone players, I saw Dexter Gordon. I saw Sonny Rollins. I saw Sonny Stitt. I
Wow.
I saw Jimmy Forrest with Al Gray. They came together, Al Gray and Jimmy Forrest. I mean, there was so many guys down here, and then jazz musicians coming down. Well, I saw Roy at this club, Bubba's in Fort Lauderdale, and I went in to see him with a couple of friends. And I got there for the first set, and Roy gets up, and he's clamming. His sound's all airy. There's a lot of spit in his sound, and the guys I came with, they said, "Hey, we're not going to stay. This guy's past his prime. We don't want to hear this." They got up and they left. I stayed. The second set, Roy got a little better. By the third set, he was playing his ass off.
Wow.
By the fourth set, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, he was tearing the walls out of this place, man. It was amazing. And these guys, the best part of it is, on a break, they go sit at the bar. You can walk right up to them and talk to them. So I
Sure.
went up to Roy, and I said to Roy, I said, "Hey, Roy," I said, "what kind of trumpet are you playing?" He says, "I don't know, man. It's up on the bandstand. Go look at it if you want." I went over, I looked at it. It was a LeBlanc 707 Sonic. So I went back to him. I said, "It's a LeBlanc." He said, "Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's the one I'm playing now." I said, and he kept his mouthpiece. He kept that Outcast mouthpiece in a little leather pouch around his neck. He had like a rawhide strap and a little pouch, and the mouthpiece was around his neck. He kept it in there all the time. He got better and better. And years later, I mean, 25 years later, I was doing a gig with the tenor player, Scott Hamilton. And
Sure.
Scott had played with Roy at Jimmy Ryan's. And I was telling him how Roy could hardly play the first set. And then the second set, he was a little better. He said, yeah, he said, Roy never touched his horn. He said, he'd warm up on the bandstand. He said he did that at Jimmy Ryan's all the time.
Wow.
He sounded so good, man. By
Unbelievable.
3 o'clock in the morning, he was just coming into his own.
Wow.
Yeah.
Um, uh, what about other pretty famous players? And did you? What we're trying to get at is there were like a lot of these hotels, like the Fontainebleau or whatever, where you had like these name acts or what have you. Was it like Vegas in the sense that they had house big bands, and did you work in any of those kind of places?
No, it wasn't that they had house big bands. Those places, a name act would come in, and a certain contractor would contract it, and he used the guys he liked. It's like that in every
Okay.
town.
Okay.
I mean, they use the guys they like. And initially, I did mostly nightclub work,
Okay.
and I was mostly playing jazz, and my thing was I knew lots of tunes, hundreds of tunes, and
Bingo.
I was never a very good sight reader because I never went to school. I mean, I left school
Sure.
at 15, so I was never playing in any bands. That's really where you learn to read, or you go on the road with a band, which I didn't do. So, I was in my mid-20s, and Kenny Falk, who great trumpet player, still around. He did a lot for me. Kenny Falk, a wonderful guy, great trumpet player. I was on the Buddy Rich band, and I think he was on in '68, maybe. He followed Chuck Finley, and great high chops, man. And he's on all the KC and the Sunshine things. He did a lot of recording with Vinny Tano. Anyway, Kenny called me up one day, and he wanted to trade Bob Reeves sleeves with me. You know those sleeves. I
Yeah.
was nuts with those things for a while. I had pockets full of them on the gigs, and I was constantly switching. So I went over to Kenny's, and we decided we were going to trade some sleeves. And he said to me, he says, "Hey, how come I never see you on any gigs?" Because he was strictly a section trumpet player, a reading trumpet player. He wasn't a jazz player or a faker or anything. And I says, "Well, I says, I'm not the best sight reader. I don't have a lot of experience with that. That's not really my thing." And he didn't believe me. He says, "Oh, come on. Says, you got chops like that, and you say you can't play in a section? Come on." Anyway, he didn't believe me, so I proved it to him. And then after I proved it to him, this guy had me come over his house twice a week, and he schooled me in section playing. I would have never got on all these big shows and done all the name acts I did if it wasn't for Kenny Falk. I owe him everything for that. He
Wow.
really was good to me. I mean, he had me at his house twice a week, and we'd sit there and he'd pull out charts. He played with the Jaco Pastorius big band. He had those charts. He'd pull out 3 views of a secret, and then we'd sight read it down, And I'd get tripped up, and he'd say, "Why'd you get tripped up there?" And I'd say, "Well," when you see that, think of this and stuff. Just little tips that I never
No
had a chance
kidding.
to pick up. And and then he started getting me on some gigs. He got me in with some big contractors that didn't know me, and I started getting all kinds of jobs with Kenny, working name acts. Ray Charles, Frank Sinatra Jr., the Temptations. Everybody's played with the Temptations, but I mean, a lot of name acts, and it was all through Kenny Falk and his
Wow.
me out and schooling me in how to be a good section trumpet player.
Did you ever get asked to play in more of a classical environment at all?
Nah, I always turned that stuff down. I
Really?
always,
Yo, you got asked.
I always prided myself in knowing my limitations. You know that Clint Eastwood movie where he says a man's got to know his limitations. Well,
Yeah.
I'm no legit player, man. I can
Wow.
I do a lot of etudes, and I played out of all the books, St. Jacobs, the Grand
Yeah.
Method, Arben's book, the Gotti book. I have them all, but I'm no legit player. you know.
Didn't you do the circus too, you told me?
I did it once. I was real young. They needed a sub, and I really had no business even being there. I was young and inexperienced, but they needed a body for the fourth chair, And but I got to hear Keith Green that day, and it was
Oh,
it
yeah.
was just going for that was worth it.
Absolutely. Do you
It
know
was
that I don't know if he was playing trumpet at the time, but he was the state champion in North Carolina on trombone.
really.
Yeah.
Huh.
I mean,
And,
and he was just a marvelous, marvelous trumpet player.
and the funny thing is the guy he stands out in front of the band and he's conducting, and he looks like a movie star. He's got this beautiful tan. He's got this beautiful head of black hair, and he's a big guy. And then you hear him talk, and he's like from Alabama.
Yeah, North
I,
Carolina.
you know,
I saw an interview he just did recently. He says I was from Mayberry.
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
What a trumpet player, though. Holy shit! Wow,
at
amazing.
what point did you start getting students?
Oh, I didn't I didn't start teaching any students till probably 2010, maybe. It wasn't something I ever really thought about doing, you know. Then the business started that's when the business started slowing down, really, you know. After the millennium, you could see things slowing down. I have a theory. I think all these guys around here during the millennium try to get rich. They were all charging a fortune. And and you have a country club, you're used to paying 5,000 on New Year's Eve for a band. Now all of a sudden it's 15,000. They say, hell, I'll go with a DJ. Screw it, we'll go with a DJ. They had a DJ, everybody had a good time. Next time they have a party, hey, New Year's Eve, the millennium, we had a DJ, it was great. We don't need a band. I think that killed the business, the millennium. The New Year's Eve millennium was, everybody was trying to make a fortune, you know.
Wow. Yeah, I think it was like a golden goose. Same thing happened up here.
Oh, sure.
In the heyday of the club date business, which was what my thing was.
Yeah, my thing. It was my thing. Sure, club dates. That's what I did.
And you said something that's interesting. When you played club dates, in many cases you never knew who you were playing with, number one. But the one thing you did have to know was that you had to know the tunes. And if the female vocalist or the male vocalist came in and he was in B concert, well, you just had to do it, and not try to step on yourself. Let me ask you this, two questions. There's when I was younger, there was talk about, well, this player is a natural, or that player is a natural. What are your thoughts about that? Because I have an opinion on it that I'd like to discuss with you.
All right, I'll tell you what I think. I think it absolutely happens. It absolutely happens. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And there's a couple of guys I'm thinking of right now, and I'm not sure if I should say their names, but two guys I'm thinking of that were absolutely natural players, stellar trumpet players, both of them. And they had some dental problems. And what happens with those guys is when you're a natural, and it's always been there, when you lose it because of a dental issue or whatever, you get into a spin you can never come out of, because you can't fit. You didn't learn how to do it in the first place. It was just there. You understand?
Yeah.
I honestly think that there's some guys out there, they have the perfect tooth formation, the right size mouth cavity, the right length upper lip, the right length lower lip, the right thickness. They put that mouthpiece up and everything just happens perfectly. And I do believe it because I've seen it, and I've seen those guys. Some of them, they get into a spin, they can't get out of it. They just can't. They don't know what to do to get out of it. They said, not that Al Porcino was ever in a spin, but he lived down here, and I heard stories, plenty of stories about him warming up, and the band leader or the conductor would hear him warm up, and they'd say, "Hey, are you sure this guy can do this gig?" Because those old big band guys, and I know you know this, they didn't know how to practice. They didn't know how to practice. They just played the gig. Their chop, when they were working, their chops were up. When they weren't working, the horn stayed in their case. They didn't know how to practice. Some of those guys,
Wow. What about the concept of sound? What I'm getting at is, do you believe that how someone can develop their own sound, is that something you believe would be more auditory or practice wise here, or both?
Well, I mean, Reinhardt said that everybody has their own sound, and it's like a fingerprint. You really can't change it. You can modify it with trumpets and mouthpieces and stuff, but he used to say that. I'm not sure if I believe that or not. I mean, you can certainly, you can really change your sound with another horn or another mouthpiece, You go from playing a 1.5 C to a 6A 4A, you're going to change your sound drastically. You know, I mean, but some people pick the horn up and they got a beautiful sound. I mean, I'm sure you see that with kids.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, you catch a kid, he picks the horn up, he sounds beautiful. Never played the trumpet in his life. Plays a beautiful middle G, just beautiful, you know?
Absolutely. You ever run into any kind of chop spins, like you call it? You ever have a spin?
Sure,
Choppers?
sure,
Okay.
every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks? Okay.
Listen, they asked Bernie Glow one time, something about how his chops feel or something. He said, if I have one day a year I feel really great, that's a lot. You're always fighting something. Look, let's call it what it is. The trumpet's a big pain in the ass. All right. I mean, I've been playing it my whole life. Okay. I mean, I forget who said this, Dizzy or Louie. They said it sits in the case and waits for you.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. So what are you doing now? Are you still gigging, more teaching? What kind of stuff you got going on?
There's really not that much work left for me around here anymore. And ever since COVID, I had a few little steadies going. I had a few nightclub jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I say nightclubs, I was working in a wine bar a couple nights a week in Boca, and that closed up during COVID. And I had a Sunday in an Italian restaurant with a little band. It was a little 6-piece band. That place closed permanently. And then I had a cigar bar, and they let me. It was just me and a piano player, and they let us go for a DJ. So I basically lost those few jobs, and
Sure.
I just kind of figure I'm retired now, or semi-retired, whatever. But I like doing
teaching though, right? You're teaching students, what have you?
I really like helping the guys the pros that can play and they're having some chop trouble. I love doing that. I really do. I give it 1,000% for these guys. I really want to see them play great, all of them.
Wow. I remember, because I'm a Caruso guy. I studied with Carmine for quite a number of years. And Carmine,
I took one lesson with him. Yeah.
He used to. I'll tell you a couple of funny anecdotes about Carmine. He used to call the guys that come in with problems cripples, because that's how he started with Lou Olds, basically helping him. But the funny thing about Carmine's office, it was actually the brother Jimmy's office, and he had the chairs lined up, right? It was like a barbershop. The chairs were lined up, and guys would come in early, because I used to do this, and you'd watch, Victor Paz and Marvin Stamm and Randy Brown. All these guys come in and take their lessons, and Herb Alpert, of course, on the phone as well. But just a wonderful, wonderful experience. And it's the kind of thing where every player, the teacher teaches differently, obviously, for every player. There isn't like one size fits all, because you don't know where a student is coming from, especially like you say, if you have issues. What about I'll tell you something that I'm seeing.
I just want to ask you one thing about Carmine. I always heard he was like a psychiatrist.
That's correct.
Like, straighten your head out.
Well, you know what? Yes, the answer to that was he could peg you right from the start, psychologically. All right. I don't remember my first lesson with him, but I think he pegged me as a little bit of a wise ass, and he was right.
Did he take you to the Chaka song? Did he ever take you over there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. With Bill Harrison, absolutely, all the time. But the other thing was that he wanted to know if I could speak Italian. So I says, I don't know very, very much, but I know somebody who does that. He says, gee, I have students in Italy, but I want to talk more Italian. So I says, hang on for a second. I gave him my mother's phone number. So he gets on the phone. He's talking to my mother. It was great. They probably went on for about 25 minutes,
Funny.
But
Good
yeah,
story.
the answer to your question is yes. And I will tell you this. In terms of the influence he made on me was much more on the psychological thing that I can use with students than so much chop stuff.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, because that's so I mean, you get a kid that comes and maybe they don't have confidence in themselves, or and you can kind of sense, that something's not, where it should be, and then you approach it that way, you know. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, he was, he had the mental aspect of it down exceptionally well. But the one thing I wanted to ask you, we talked a little bit about chop issues, and I'm encountering, not so much myself, but talking to a lot of trumpet players, a lot of auditory type issues, vertigo and hearing issues and what have you. And I think that a lot of that is of our own doing, playing all those gigs, rock gigs and jazz gigs, whatever, just loud, loud, loud. But it's something that I think, like, the ITG needs to take a look at, especially the vertigo thing. See, Carmine had Meniere's disease, which is like a kind of like vertigo type thing. And I guess it was from all these guys coming in and, playing loud and high. And the thing that he did in the end was
That's
a guy.
Yeah, he had the headphones when I saw him. Yeah.
He got those from a guy who worked at the airport. There were the headphones that the mechanics and the ground guys work at the airport, But anyway, do you have a website or anything like that? I mean, I know you're not the biggest advertiser.
Man, no website. My daughter is going to do one for me. My daughter, she said she would help me. Listen, I'm going to be 61. I wasn't raised with computers. I'm technically challenged. As they say.
God bless you. Look great, man. I got you by 14 years. So I'm 75 and, still hanging in, practicing every day. Anyway, if people would want to reach out to you, how can they reach you?
Well, I'll give you, I have my phone number. I give you my phone number.
Okay.
Did I say it on here, you think? Or
Yeah,
what?
that's cool. Yeah.
Get some crank calls from some perverted trumpet players.
But I know you set their asses straight.
Some heavy breathing and then a squeaky hygiene.
Yeah, play Misty for me.
LaBarbera, we're watching you. Anyway, it's 561-289-2658. You can text me or call me there. And my email is clbtrumpet74@gmail.
Great. Chris LaBarbera, this has been long overdue. Thank you so very much. What I'm going to do is put this up on YouTube, on my channel, and we'll get some circulation. Sound good? Okay, bro.
Hey, stop. Right. Hey, take care. See you, my friend.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Take care. God bless you, brother. Bye-bye. Take care.